Americanuck Radio. News, opinion, and a little irreverence from both sides of the 49th parallel. This is Americanuck Radio with Mike Phillip.
Here we are, once again, another episode of Americanuck Radio, coming at you live from Western Canada in the province of Alberta. This is the Americanuck, Mike Phillip, and we have got just a slam dunk show for you today. I've been excited all week to do this show. In the first hour, we have the author of a book, Operation Devil Horns, the Takedown of MS-13 in San Francisco, Mr. Ray Bolger. In the second hour, we've got the interim leader of the Alberta Independence Party, Mr. Dave Bjorkman. We're going to be discussing all kinds of things. First of all, hey, Don, did you hear that Bush Sr. died?
I saw that last night. Yeah. What is he, 95 years old? 95
years old, yeah. Now, the conspiracy theorists online are saying that he opted to die instead of wait and have his name trashed through the mud with the releases of information that Donald Trump's going to be putting out right away. I don't know, man. A lot of people die at 95.
He's been in and out of the hospital over the last couple of years, almost died a couple of times. So, yeah.
You know how the internet is. Anyways, so without further talk about the illustrious career of Bush Sr., love him or hate him, let's launch this show, everybody.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
The Greek over in Ottawa. How you doing, Mike?
I'm black and white. How are you?
Just because you can't turn on a woman doesn't mean the rest of us need a drug. You, my friend, are in deep doo-doo.
Americanuck Radio.
In your face.
Illegal alien criminals all over the USA. A violent Salvadoran gang called MS-13 is causing trouble.
Designated a transnational criminal organization with roots in Central America.
MS-13, of course, is one of the deadliest gangs in the world. We know that now because a lot of them are here.
More than 30,000 members worldwide, up to 10,000 in the U.S.
Two separate threats, credible threats, to assassinate police officers. They come from the gang known as MS-13.
Border agents arrest an MS-13 gang member traveling apparently with one of the migrant caravans.
They like to knife them and cut them and let them die slowly because that way it's more painful and they enjoy watching that much more. These are animals.
Mira Salvatrucha, a name that inspires terror in South, Central, and North America. We've got the author of Operation Devil Horns, Mr. Ray Bolger, joining us to talk about a fantastic story, a battle between civic and federal authorities in trying to root this gang out of San Francisco. Mr. Ray Bolger, welcome to Americanuck Radio.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Great to be here.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, I gotta say, for sending me this wonderful signed copy of your book. I read it, and so many things, I don't know how to describe it. There was times when I almost started crying, to be quite honest with you. I teared up at some of the things that went on over the course of this story. We're going to get into that. But first of all, Mr. Bolger, could you please get into the origin of MS-13 or Mira Salvatrucha, how they started, and just the roots of this organization? I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, sure, thanks. They started in L.A. in the early 90s, thereabouts, among a large diaspora of El Salvadorans, many of whom had been refugees of the civil wars in El Salvador, Nicaragua, that region, which was torn up by a great deal of violence. So there was a huge wave of Salvadorans in particular to L.A., and the theory goes that the gang MS-13 was formed as a minority, a small group of gang members among the larger group of Salvadorans in L.A., essentially to as gangs do, protect their turf against rival ethnic groups like black gangs in the city, Mexican gangs. And the Salvadorans, some of those gang members had experienced battle and civil war, so they were pretty bad customers, and they were successful in carving out their turf. And then there was a large deportation of gang members, a crackdown in L.A., so they were deported back to Central America, and in that environment, which is very corrupt governments, the prison systems there are nightmarish. They flourished there. So essentially what occurred was a back and forth illegal immigration from Central America, gang members coming back to the States. And so that's sort of the origin of the gang.
Let me ask you this, Ray. Do you think, in your opinion, that U.S. policy and the drug war initiated by President Bush Sr. Had a big part to play in the civil wars there and possibly the formation of this gang?
I guess you could make that argument. I mean, this is a very complex geopolitical, situation. So when there's war, there's chaos, and when there's chaos, crime can flourish. You've got people raising money for their respective forces, perhaps by selling drugs. So, I mean, it's a complicated, mixed-up scenario. But, I mean, you can make that argument, I think.
It's obviously a little bit of an oversimplification, but I mean, if you ask me, it would definitely be a factor. I mean, U.S. policy effed Central America and gave birth to a demon, if you want to really simplify it.
Well, that was my perspective going into this story, and I still share that in part. But it's, again, very complex. So the Soviets were active in Central America at the time, which is right in the backyard of the U.S., so to speak. So, part of me says, well, what was the U.S. to do? I mean, how to allow that, Soviet intervention in Central America without, countering it in some way and therefore backing, questionable forces and allies. And I'm personally of mixed mind, but I understand your point within that regard. Policy in Central America was part of the turmoil and the disruption, so you can make that argument that that policy led in a way of creating a demon, as you said.
Yeah. So, and like I said, obviously it's an oversimplification, but I mean, like you say, if there was Soviet involvement and destabilization taking on, it's kind of a catch-22. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And governments make mistakes. I mean, there's policy and then there's the reality on the ground. And I think that's what came crashing together here.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, the CIA and covert forces tend to get involved in some pretty nasty things, and so the U.S. hands are not clean in what was happening in the civil wars, and probably to some extent guilty of some atrocities, so yes, in a way, again, when I first came into the story, that was my opinion. I just, I thought it was a form of blowback, right? Like for U.S. intervention in Central America, kind of like, okay, well, you get what you deserve, you get what you make. So.
Yeah, the problem with that is that innocent people suffer in El Salvador and San Francisco and all points in between. So that is literally the problem. Violence begets more violence, no matter who it's perpetrated on, I guess, is the walk away from this. So we've only got about a minute left. Really quick, what interested you in writing this story?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. It was a classic tale in my mind as a writer of a sort of a maverick cop taking a look around in the streets of San Francisco, an American federal agent, my co-author, Michael Santini. And despite the political hurdles of sanctuary city policy, et cetera, just decided to do whatever he could, whatever it took to take down a very violent gang that was committing violent acts in the streets of San Francisco on a regular basis.
I'll tell you what, people want to idolize somebody for being able to dunk a basketball in a net, but Mr. Michael Santini is a true hero. We're going to get into this story on the other side of this commercial break. Stick around, everybody, on Americanuck Radio with Ray Bolger, author of Operation Devil Horns.
On one hand, you're saying the United States government is spending millions of dollars to eliminate the flow of drugs onto our streets. At the same time, we are doing business with the very same government that is flooding our streets with cocaine.
See. Let me show you a few of the other characters that are involved in this tragic comedy.
I'm on the border of Bolivia, working for pennies, treated like a slave. The coca fields have to be ready. The spirit of my people is starving, broken and sweaty, dreaming about revolution, looking at my machete.
Americanuck Radio.
The book is Operation Devil Horns, the takedown of MS-13 in San Francisco, authored by Ray Bolger, who we're honored to have join us on Americanuck Radio this Saturday afternoon. He has a co-author, Federal Agent Michael Santini. And Ray, over the next segment here, by the way, everybody in the comment room, Dave in Washington, D.C., and the rest of you, I see your questions. We will get them to Mr. Bolger. Just hang tight. Mr. Bolger, could you get into this story and give us a timeline? I know it's not much time in a 10-minute segment, but if you can give us an overview of what went on in San Francisco, then I'd like to get into sanctuary city policy later on in the show, and indeed the situation today at the southern border. So with that, Operation Devil Horns, Mr. Bolger, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. This is a quick rundown of the time. Again, my co-author, Michael Santini, his pen name, prior to being assigned in San Francisco as a special agent, had been a Border Patrol agent for a few years on the southern border, and so was well familiar with the situation there with regard to border crossing, illegal border immigration, etc. And when he got to San Francisco after 9/11 and the towers coming down and the formation of Homeland Security and his agency, which was the Border Patrol, came under that. And so he was assigned a special agent living in the Mission District, which is a highly Latino populated neighborhood, very vibrant, cool neighborhood, but also at the time, very violent neighborhood. I took a look around, saw that there was rival gangs, including MS-13 and the 20th Street Clique, whom he ended up targeting, and the Norteños, which are a rival Mexican gang, carving out turf in the neighborhood, marking it with graffiti. There was a high degree of homicides in the neighborhood, and he decided, well, wait a minute, I'm going to do something about this. And as a federal agent for an agency with immigration and law enforcement authority, he began to bring that weight to bear and look to make partnerships with some local SFPD gang task force officers who had been dealing with the situation for many years, but who really with one hand tied behind their back because they didn't have authority to cooperate with the federal agents, with ICE, with Homeland Security investigations. They were prohibited from doing so, more or less. And they didn't have the authority that the immigration police have to bring to bear, to use as leverage against gang members to threaten them with deportation or federal charges in order to cooperate as informants. Michael Santini managed to flip a couple of the gang members as criminal informants, and this is the way that he created a wedge, which ultimately was successful in cracking this clique, which had an estimated 150 members at some point, and ultimately led to more than 30 convictions for federal racketeering charges. There are currently that many 20th Street gang members who are in federal prison for life for murder in the aid of racketeering, et cetera. So that's the quick rundown of the timeline.
Well, and you said that Mr. Santini was able to get several of them to flip. And, I read the book, but can you imagine the conflict and fear in a member of Mara Salvatrucha at the thought of turning on the big homies and back in Honduras who can literally basically just give you the thumbs down and you're looking at an ice pick in the ear?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, one of the two main informants that Santini managed to flip, he was already wanted as being by the big homies. He was wanted dead, and he was running in the U.S. He was a Honduran, and he managed to convince the local clique, the 20th Street clique, that of the fact that he was a different gang member. He created sort of a false identity. They never actually vetted him back home in the home country, which they typically will do. That's why it's very hard to crack MS-13, because they will check on if a gang member just shows up, they're going to check and see who's their family, who knows them back home, are they legit. So he was the informant, who's Diego in the book. He was skating on thin ice with the gang had they discovered who he really was, because he was already wanted by the big homies dead.
Right, and the big homies, for everybody listening, are the heads of the gang in the Honduran prison system that, like I said, they have cash, they have cell phones all funneled to them from the United States, and they literally have the power of life and death. Dave Bjorkman of the Alberta Independence Party, sitting across from me, has a question or something he'd like to add to the conversation. Dave, go ahead.
Yes, hi. My question is, how many illegal immigrants are we talking about over this span? Do you guys have a number of how many of them have come into the United States?
How many illegal immigrants who are gang members?
In both of the gang members.
All of them.
And then all of them.
Is there you have any idea on the numbers of that? It's probably millions.
Oh, yeah, overall, I mean, the generally accepted number thrown around as illegal immigrants in the U.S. is about 10 million. There are others who think it's a lot higher than that, but I mean, I think it's generally accepted at least 10 million across the U.S. And
what are the
Go ahead.
No, you go. You keep going.
Well, I was just going to add that in terms of MS-13 gang members, the generally accepted number in the U.S. total is around 10,000.
10,000. That's an army.
That's an army.
That's insane. Yeah. So I mean. And these guys, okay, so let's look at the situation right now with more coming in on the border. I mean, you've got MS-13 posing as families with children that they probably kidnapped and killed their parents. We've heard reports of that, where children are traumatized because they've watched their parents basically get murdered right in front of them and then put into a state of catatonic fear to say anything, and being basically used as shields to bring into get these guys in the U.S.
Well, that scenario is almost too horrible to imagine if it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, we've had these reports come out, but and you know who's talking about this is the workers at the internment areas where they're keeping these kids. Everybody was freaking out about, Trump's separating children from their parents, and it turns out, I mean, what are you going to do with these kids? You're going to throw them into general population and parents to keep them with their MS-13 handlers? I mean, that doesn't work. So. Obviously, this is one of the most violent gangs, but I mean, here's the other thing too, Ray. It's not just MS-13. You've got the Latin Kings. You've got La Familia. There's been some of them caught in Canada here as well. I hear the music, and that means we're at the end of another segment. I can't believe how quick this show is going. On the other side, we're going to talk about the horrible murder that brought this case to the forefront and allowed Mr. Santini to do his job. We'll be back after this.
Americanuck Radio.
We're live. This is the Americanuck beaming out on the airwaves.
looking for a chateau.
Ray Bolger, author of Operation Devil Horns, joining us. One of the best books I've read in a long time. Listen, you need to read this book or listen to the audio book, which is expertly narrated. That guy you got narrating the audio book was just great. I listened to a little bit of that as well. But so let's get into the Bologna family, or Bologna. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. And this, Bologna, this horrific. Now, listen, anybody listening thinking, well, we've always had gang problems, and this is just another one. No, this is different. This is different, okay? So let's get into the situation with this gangbanger calling himself Popeye and how the city of San Francisco failed the Bologna family.
Who was since convicted of the triple murders. Edwin Ramos is his given name, a Salvadoran by birth, came to the country as a young teenager, dropped out of high school, was recruited by a gang, joined the 20th Street Clique, which was the one targeted by my co-author Santini in Operation Devil Horns. He, as a juvenile, had committed a couple of fairly serious violent crimes, one attacking a pregnant woman to steal her purse, and another was a severe beating by him and another gang member of an innocent victim on a public bus. So he had these two prior juvenile convictions, and after he turned 18, he was riding in a car with another 20th Street Clique member, and they were in possession of a firearm. They were pulled over for a broken taillight. The firearm was determined to have been the same gun, eventually determined to have been the same gun used in a double murder of a pair of innocent victims. But Popeye, Edwin Ramos, was released from custody and went about, gang banging in the streets. And unfortunately, tragically, during a sort of ongoing 2-day-long battle between 20th Street and their rival Mexican gang, the Norteños, Popeye was driving around in the car with another gang member, went by the name of Flacco. And the two of them pulled up next to a car, and there was Mr. Bologna and his two sons were just in their car waiting to take a left turn, and the two 20th Street gang members, Popeye and Flacco, looked over, saw them. Maybe they thought they looked close enough to the Norteños, but they opened fire on them and killed two of the Bologna sons and the father.
Unbelievably tragic. Kamala Harris actually had a role in letting Popeye back on the street, didn't she?
She was the DA of San Francisco at the time and chose not to charge Popeye with any offense when he was, after they were pulled over in possession of the illegal firearm. So he was released because there were no charges pressed against him prior to the Bologna murders.
Megyn Kelly had Danielle Bologna on her show. We've got some audio of that. I'm going to play it here. Listen. Okay, so Megyn Kelly gets it wrong right off the bat. She said it was a road rage incident. I looked at a picture of the Bolognas, and the guy kind of does look like a Latin gangbanger, to be quite honest. He's got a shaved head and that little Fu Manchu, but he didn't deserve to die.
But you pointed out that, he was a hard-working, good father.
Yeah.
Sports and
family man, had nothing to do with drugs or gangs. Let's listen to a little bit of this Megyn Kelly interview here so you get a feel for it.
Well, it was road rage that led to a triple murder, and police say the suspect should have been deported years ago. Anthony Bologna and his two sons were gunned down on their way home from a family picnic. Minding their own business, not doing anything wrong, they were shot dead in their car on the streets of San Francisco after an argument ensued in an intersection between the men and a gang suspect. Cops say Edwin Ramos, shown here as the killer, a suspected MS-13 gang member here illegally from El Salvador. Ramos had been convicted of 2 violent crimes as a juvenile, but he was never referred to the feds for deportation because San Francisco is a sanctuary city.
Because sanctuary cities don't allow federal immigration law to be implemented. Can we talk a little bit about that before moving on to the next one, Ray?
Yeah, there is a little bit of confusion there in that even under sanctuary policy in San Francisco, if an illegal immigrant is charged with a felon, there was nothing preventing the local SFPD, for the local law enforcement, from reporting them to the feds. But I think, in effect, just the policy, maybe unofficial policy in the police department was in the SFPD was such that the SFPD officers were very wary, even the DA's office, wary of being perceived as being anti-illegal immigrant, and so didn't really choose to enforce pressing charges or informing the ICE that had somebody, an illegal immigrant, in their custody who was charged with a felony. In other words, they were permitted to do that under the sanctuary policy, but didn't. And then,
absolutely.
And for the local street cops, they really got the message that if they were perceived as helping immigration police, ICE, then their careers could be severely compromised if they were viewed.
Yeah, which affects their pension, their family, their future, and everything. So I get why they would be fearful of opposing that policy, because it is the policy, it's the law. And if you've got a Kamala Harris as a DA, that's how it's going to go. But policy schmolicy, none of this matters to Danielle Bologna.
Danielle Bologna is the woman who lost her husband and her 2 sons in that attack, and she joins us this morning. Danielle, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I know this is a tough thing to talk about, and I appreciate you being here. Has there been any acknowledgement from Mayor Newsom or the city of San Francisco officials to you of the fact that had they simply reported this guy's deportation or illegal immigration status, your husband and sons might be alive today?
If they would have, I feel like they should have said something to me, definitely. And also, I have not spoken to the mayor at all in this incident, and it was a senseless crime. And had they done something, this animal would not have taken my family.
I find it difficult to speak after listening to that woman. And if you don't have a lump in your chest after hearing that story and listening to that woman struggle to talk, remembering her husband and her sons, I don't want to know you. It's that simple.
I feel that the government should have stepped in. I feel that they allow these immigrants to come in. And how dare they strip our families like this? None of us should ever have to go through something like this. I never thought in a million years that I would be sitting here talking to you, nor having to bury 3 beautiful loved ones.
That's the sound of pain. I'd sure like to have her up in front of Kamala Harris and all the shenanigans she's pulling right now. Now, the sanctuary city thing, I'm not black and white with it, okay? There are people that want to get out of El Salvador and Honduras because of the situation there, and they should be given that chance. But the fact is, you're always going to have, as she called, animals like Popeye and Psycho and individuals that like the killing. They like the fear. They love the blood and the life. At the same time, you've got people that want out of the gang. They grew up in it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a nuanced issue. It's not black and white. When we get back, we're in a little bit of a free-for-all here. We've got questions in the comments section and several things I'm curious about as well. The book is Operation Devil Horns, the takedown of MS-13 in San Francisco, available at Americanuckradio.com.
Americanuck Radio.
this music, I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, so many beautiful and great things have come out of Latino culture. I mean, if you think about Honduras, if you think about El Salvador, Guatemala, all these countries, southern Mexico, these people literally live in a paradise on earth. They don't even have snow like we do, but they're under such a scourge of violence and corruption from the gangs, the police, the government. It's, you know, for North Americans who just think we need to let everybody come on up here because they're having a rough life. No, we can't, because I was listening to a Honduran lady talking with Stefan Molyneux about the culture on the ground in Honduras. And it's basically a violent kleptocracy where if you don't have something chained down, locked up, nailed down, and look away for even 15 seconds, it's going to be gone because of the crime rate. So, I mean, these are people that we've got to seriously vet. Now, we were talking during the break about sanctuary city policy, and it looks like that policy in San Francisco failed a lot of people and enabled a lot of criminality. It also probably helped a few people at the same time. That was another thing that I was thinking about reading this book. It almost humanized some of these MS-13 gang members because some of them wanted out. They wanted to raise a family, become an American, have a job, have a good life. So you cannot paint these people all with the same brush. Am I a fan of the gang? No. Am I saying that it's a nuanced issue? Yes, I am. Now, the whole sanctuary city thing, it kind of gets me because, look, I'm in Canada. Ray is in the United States. We've got listeners in the UK. Immigration law is different in Canada than it is in the United States of America. It's different in the US and Canada than it is in, say, the UK. But every time somebody wants to create a quote-unquote safe space, they call it a sanctuary city. So I think that that's kind of a code word for people to hear and know that that's going to be a free-for-all zone or somewhere where they can get to. I mean, you had cities of refuge going back to the Old Testament. But it really sounds to me, Ray, and you can tell me if you agree with me on this statement, but just the term sanctuary city is basically for public consumption, and at the end of the day, it's meaningless because the laws governing all these countries, states, and provinces are all different.
Yeah, you're right. It's very complicated, and it's just a broad term, and you don't know exactly what it means until you get into the details, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But it obviously implies a community or city that's at least open to, embracing immigrants who are going to be productive, good citizens. It certainly doesn't mean creating a safe haven for violent gangs. But unfortunately, depending on how it's enforced in a given jurisdiction and the specifics of the policy, sometimes, like in San Francisco, in the case of Operation Devil Horns, that is how it played out on the streets. It plays out on the streets in many cases.
Well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions is how the old saying goes. Mr. Bjorkman across the desk in the studio from me here has something he wants to add in on the sanctuary situation. Dave, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta. We just recently passed the first stages of Sanctuary City by our city council, and they're allowed to use the services not to be reported. It's the first stages of what sounds like the U.S. has been going through, right? And, when you research this stuff, from what I've learned, we see the impact on employment and how that changes employers when you have employers employing illegal immigrants, and the wages, it reduces the legal wages of every business around in that industry. And I'm just, your thoughts on that, how it affects the community?
Well, me personally, I favor employment for American citizens before the new arrivals who are not citizens, however they get here. So, I mean, immigration policy, in my mind, should be such that it promotes the best interests of in this case, American citizens. And I understand what you're saying in terms of, in the U.S., Salvadorans, Central Americans, Mexicans, who are doing jobs in trades that might otherwise be taken by Americans. So I think a lot of this depends on like what state of the business cycle we're in. Like if things are good and everybody's employed, then people are going to be more likely to embrace new arrivals. And frankly, from just my personal observation of Salvadorans and Mexicans and et cetera, folks from that region, they typically are like really hard workers. I mean, kind of I hate to say it, but in some cases, put your average American to shame almost. A lot of them are like, come off of farms and they're just hard workers. But obviously, the policy of American immigration needs to favor U.S. citizens first, and that means like jobs unless they're unfilled jobs that Americans aren't going to do, which is what some people argue those are the types of jobs that these folks are taking, then it's not right. But
we're talking about legal versus illegal. I'm all for legal immigration, knowing who stands single file in line, come through, we use it as a tap, what we need. Like, going for your book in this MS-13, isn't this the issue from illegal immigration? Isn't this what this is all about? Like, why have Sanctuary City? You're promoting that illegal immigration. You're promoting these criminal growths like tumors.
Well, like Mike was just saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, the origin of Sanctuary City was, as I was saying earlier, when the civil wars were raging in Central America, and the U.S. was a big part of those, many Americans, typically of the left and liberal, felt obligated to provide innocent people who were escaping that violence a safe haven. And he's right, Mike's right about this being like an ancient tradition in the Judeo-Christian culture of providing sanctuary to refugees from warfare. So that's the motivation. But I hear what you're saying. I mean, we need to have strong borders. I mean, borders are essential. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. So it's complicated, and it's not all black and white. But I hear what you're saying.
Absolutely. And going back to what you were saying just about the quality of people, I mean, I grew up as a kid. There was a guy named Mauricio, and his family came up from El Salvador, and they basically got a tip that the family and the farm next to theirs was all in the process of being brutally murdered when his father got the tip, and they basically escaped the country with whatever they could carry in the back of a truck and made it to Canada somehow. And they were some of the nicest people you ever met in your life, and that's where the waters get muddy. We've got about 3 minutes left here. There were some heroes and some names that need to be mentioned in Operation Devil Horns. Let's talk about that, Ray.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the main hero of the story is actually my co-author, Michael Santini. He's the one who led the case, the 4-year-long undercover investigation in San Francisco, the inside gang members, built the RICO case, ended up taking down more than 30 of this MS-13 clique members. But in addition to him, on behalf of SFPD, there are a couple of officers who really risked their careers by enabling Santini to make that happen. And they're identified in the book, but not by their real name. In the book, they're Ricardo Cabrera and Sean Gibson. And in addition to them, the federal prosecutor, Laura Gwynn, really was very instrumental in building this RICO case, which enabled that, again, to dismantle this clique of 150 gang members from the top down and lead to more than 30 convictions. So it was a success story involving agencies in the city, state, federal level finally coming together to do a job together to take down some very dangerous criminals.
Absolutely. We got about 2 minutes left in this segment. Let's head over to the phone lines. There's a bunch of people been waiting to take the call, but there's so much information coming out here. Ken in Alberta wants to talk about immigration and the economy in Alberta. Ken, you're live. Make it quick, buddy. We don't have much time. Hello, Ken. All right, Ken, can't hear you, buddy. So we're going to have to drop your call. Call back when you've got a better line, please. Everybody, the book is Operation Devil Horns, the takedown of MS-13 in San Francisco. Christmas is coming. Buy the gift of knowledge for your dad, your brother, your mom, your politician. Head over to AmericanuckRadio.com. Pick up your hard copy or audiobook. Mr. Ray Bolger, thank you so much.